We're building a comp truck, and we're going to use the new VRD platform from Vanquish to do it. We have the VRD Carbon Kit that we've built, and we have the ready-to-run version called the Stance. How much of a difference is there between these two trucks? And is one of them a better path to take? Well, let's talk about it. Now, when we say comp truck, we just mean a truck that was designed to provide maximum performance to outdo the competition. Maybe you're competing against your buddies, maybe it's at a proper scored event, but either way, performance is everything. And since the VRD platform was designed to be a comp truck, it's perfect. But do we want a ready-to-run or the kit? On the surface, the ready-to-run Stance includes everything you need to drive except the battery for $500. The VRD Carbon Kit doesn't include any of the components and it costs $430 or $70 less, and you still have to build it, so what gives? Well, when you compare them, these two trucks are extremely similar. They both have the ability to run the servo on the axle, which is comp ideal, mainly that it lowers the center of gravity with the servo weight being lower on the axle, but it also removes sprung weight from the chassis in the process. Another advantage to the servo on axle setup is it uses a 4-link front end, which from a performance standpoint is the way to go. It seems like back in the day the servo on axle setup was a lot more common and standard, but then it kind of got faded out for the 3-link Panhard setup that looked more realistic. But now it seems like servo on axle is kind of making a comeback. Both trucks also have the F10 portal axles with internal brass axle tubes, and both trucks also have front portal cover weights, and they both feature some sort of overdrive gearing where the front spins faster than the rear. Both trucks also use all metal gears. They use the same aluminum threaded shocks, and they both use the VFD transmission that puts the motor as forward and low as possible, and then it sits on an angled skid plate to combat high sides, and overall it's very nice. But it's spec'd better in the VRD Carbon Kit, and this is where we start to see some differences. With the VRD Carbon Kit, it includes the optional $90 lightweight gear set, and then the $42 lightweight aluminum motor plate as standard equipment. These parts can be purchased separately and added to the Stance too, but they're nice to have immediately for dropping down some weight. The VRD Carbon is also spec'd with carbon fiber chassis rails, as the name implies, versus the aluminum rails found on the Stance. And those carbon rails are going to be a little bit lighter weight. They look pretty slick, and they should be a little stiffer too. Picking up each truck and giving them a twist one by one, I can't really tell a difference in the amount of flex. I thought the carbon would feel stiffer, but they feel pretty even. One last difference are the lower suspension links. On the VRD Carbon Kit, it comes with thick 6.5mm links, and the Stance comes with thinner 3.5mm thick links. This may or may not be an issue really, but the Stance can always be upgraded with those thicker links down the road. Josh over at Operation 11 Charlie pointed this out to me when they brought me on as a guest to their live video, and the VRD was one of the many things that we talked about. It was super cool being on. You may want to go check that out. So, two very similar trucks, with the VRD Carbon being the higher spec truck out of the box. But it's also the least complete and most likely the most expensive to finish off, but we'll add all that up at the end. To complete the ready-to-run Stance, we just need to add a LiPo battery to the truck and that's it. To get the VRD Carbon running, we need to add a body. We picked up the Stance body to keep things even with the Stance truck. We need tires, wheels, and foam inserts, and we're using the same VXT2 tires, VTS foam inserts, and the Incision Riot wheels as used on the Stance, again to keep things even with the Stance. The VRD Carbon also needs a motor and ESC, and we picked up the Quick Run Fusion Pro combo with the 2300 kV motor. The truck also needs a steering servo, so we have a 1K TBL and we've added an aftermarket servo horn. Lastly, the truck needs a battery. Hand selecting these components and speccing out the truck the exact way we want is a ton of fun, but it can be expensive to buy all these components new for the first time, as you can see from our list here. Now, if you compare these components, these trucks are spec'd really similar. The only differences are really the electronics. We have got a brushed versus brushless setup, and then a servo that's a lot more powerful. Now on the scale to see their weights, the ready-to-run Stance is first with a 2152 gram overall weight. and a 58 front weight bias. Now switching it to the VRD Carbon shows us the kit version is a little bit lighter weight, spec'd the way it is, with a 2109 gram overall weight and a greater front weight bias, which I believe is due to using a heavier steering servo. And if you're curious, the tire and wheel set used on these trucks is especially lightweight at 120 grams. Here's the Stance throttle response. Creeps along pretty good on that low end. It's a little jerky, but not bad. I'm just barely squeezing the throttle. Let's try reverse. So here's the Fusion Pro brushless system in the kit, and it just creeps along ever so slowly, and it's a bit smoother in doing so. Let's try reverse. And the servos. Just trying to get the rear end to break loose and swipe on its own. That's what we were looking for. Here's a top speed test, and the RTR Stance has tons of torque and it immediately lunges forward, but the VRD Carbon in that all white painted body has just a bit more on top. Now when crawling these trucks, they're almost like two sides to the same coin, and it's really hard to tell them apart, at least for me. Chris, who's one of our copywriters, and myself did all the driving here, and we took turns so we could drive each truck back to back and see if we could tell a difference, and it wasn't easy. Obviously, the electronics are different, and it's probably the first thing noticed with the brushless system in the VRD Carbon being capable of going slower while being smoother and quieter, and ultimately just offering more precision if you have the skills to utilize it. The extra power from the 1K TBL servo was less obvious though for normal driving, but in those rare situations where the steering gets bound in rocks, that extra power can be a lifesaver and it just muscles through it. Now besides the electronics, it's really hard to tell a performance difference. Both of these trucks are exceptional performers, but there is one difference that we can feel here, and it's something that Chris noticed and pointed out, and it's the overdrive function. Now we mentioned earlier that both trucks had overdrive, but the RTR Stance comes with a 24% overdrive on the front tires, and the VRD Carbon comes with 37%, which just drags the rear tires even more for climbing, sharper turns, and more stability. The Stance can be upgraded to have 37% too, but after all the driving, that overdrive is the one performance difference that stood out the most, and it was kind of unexpected. And when I say it stood out the most, it was pretty subtle, but enough to notice. So which truck is the better truck? Well, they're both so dang similar, it really comes down to the needs of the person. For serious RC enthusiasts, hardcore rock crawling guys, and people who already own all of their own components are going to be best served by the VRD Carbon Kit. Imagine if you already own all your components and you don't need to buy all those things. All you're buying is the kit for $430, which is actually the least expensive way to go here. But if you don't have all that, then the Ready to Run Stance starts to make a whole lot more sense. Or if you're somebody who's just crunched on time, buying a turnkey Ready to Run that performs nearly as good as the kit is a pretty good way to go. Guys, I'm Brett from AMain Hobbies, and thanks for watching this video. Go check out the Stance, the VRD Carbon, and all the components we use with our links down below. And if you want more RC videos, check these out.